They thought she was just a waitress, someone who cleaned tables at the most exclusive syndicate restaurant in Toronto. Then Lorenzo Moretti walked in. He was the boss of the leading families and hadn't smiled since 1999. He looked at her, laughed, and told his consigliere, in a rare Sicilian dialect, that she was trash, good only for the rats. He thought she was deaf to his world. He was wrong. She didn't just understand him. She responded in the dialect of her own village, a language dead to all but the ghosts of Sicily. The room didn't just go silent, it stopped breathing. The waitress was not insignificant. She was the weapon he never imagined. Sophie adjusted the collar of her black uniform. The fabric scratched her neck. The air in Levetta always smelled the same: truffle oil, expensive cologne, and fear. It was a peculiar aroma, unique to this part of King West, where the cars parked outside were worth more than most houses in the prairies. She checked her reflection in the polished brass of the espresso machine. Her brown hair was pulled back tightly. She wore minimal makeup and kept her eyes down. The goal was invisibility. For 3 years, Sophie had perfected the art of being a piece of furniture. She wasn't Sophie, the woman. She was the hand serving espresso, the shadow clearing plates. "Table 4 is free," Marcos, the maitre d', whispered as he passed her. "And fix your apron. He's coming tonight." Sophie didn't need to ask who he was. The entire restaurant had been buzzing with nervous energy since noon. Lorenzo Moretti. The press called him a logistics consultant. The RCMP called him the Teflon Don. On the streets, he was known as Il Lupo, the wolf. Sophie felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She recognized the face. Everyone recognized it. But for her, the name Moretti carried a different weight. It was a name etched on the tombstones of a past she'd buried under a fake social insurance number and a cheap apartment in Scarborough. "I'll stay in the back section," Sophie whispered, trying to switch shifts with Diana, a younger waitress who viewed the mobsters with a mix of terror and excitement. "No chance," Marcos retorted, overhearing her. "Jana trembles when she serves soup. You have ice in your veins, Sophie. You take the VIP table. Don't embarrass me, or you're out." She nodded, gripping the tray so tightly her knuckles turned white. She'd spent a decade running from this world, and the legacy that stained her hands red before she was even born. And now she had to serve wine to the man who sat on a throne built of bones. The heavy oak doors opened. The smooth jazz music in the background didn't stop, but the conversation did. Lorenzo walked in. He was taller than he appeared in the surveillance photos Sophie had studied in her previous life. He wore a dark gray suit, so perfectly tailored it seemed capable of cutting skin. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. The moment his shoe touched the marble floor, he owned the space. By his side were his 2 lieutenants, Matteo, a brute with a scar over his eyebrow, and Silvio, the consigliere, an older man with shark-like eyes. They headed for table 4, the corner booth, with the best view of the exits. Sophie took a deep breath. "Just a waitress," she repeated to herself. "Just a ghost." She approached the table with the water pitcher. Her movements were precise and practiced. She poured the water without spilling, placing the glasses delicately on the table. Lorenzo didn't look up. He was busy scanning the menu. Everyone knew he would order ossobuco without even looking. "Good evening, gentlemen," Sophie said, her voice monotone and uninflected. "Can I get you anything from the bar?" Lorenzo waved his hand dismissively, too haughty to speak to staff. Silvio, the older man, looked up. "Open the 96 Barolo an hour before serving and bring the antipasti immediately." "Of course," she said, turning to leave. That's when it happened. She felt Lorenzo's eyes on her. It wasn't a look of attraction. It was the stare of a predator sensing movement in the undergrowth. "Wait," Lorenzo said, his voice a mix of gravel and silk. Sophie froze, still with her back to him, then turned slowly. "Yes, sir." He looked her up and down, his eyes analyzing everything. Her shoes, her hands, the way she stood. He was looking for a threat. He found a waitress. He sneered, a cruel and arrogant sound. Leaning back in his chair, he turned to Silvio and switched languages. He didn't speak English, or even standard Italian. Instead, he spoke a distorted dialect of Sicily, influenced by the Arboresh language, spoken in the mountainous villages near Palermo. It was as much a code as a language, used by the old families to discuss business in front of the local police and the Canadians. Lorenzo muttered something to Silvio, gesturing vaguely at Sophie with his chin. "Look at this woman, cheap meat. She looks like a tired mule who can't even hold a plate." Silvio chuckled, taking a sip of water. "It's a shame, Enzo. But as long as she brings the wine, who cares?" Lorenzo smiled a cruel smile. "Sifos, Sicilia. If we were in Sicily, I'd send her to clean the toilets. That's all she's worth. The insult was vile, classless. It was typical Moretti arrogance. Sophie stood there, the tray trembling slightly in her hand. Not from fear, but from rage. She knew that dialect. She didn't just know it. It was the language her grandmother sang lullabies in. It was the language her father screamed in before he was shot dead in an olive grove in Sicily 20 years ago. It was the language of her blood. The smartest thing to do was leave. The safest thing to do was be the mule he thought she was. But Sophie was tired. She was tired of hiding. She was tired of wearing the cheap uniform. And she was tired of men like Lorenzo Moretti who thought they were gods just because they carried guns. The silence at the table stretched. They expected her to bow and exit. Instead, she tightened her grip on the empty tray. Her posture shifted. The slouch of the tired waitress vanished, replaced by the proud, erect stance of a woman born to a dynasty older than his. She looked Lorenzo directly in the eye. The air in the restaurant seemed to cool 10 degrees. The jazz piano in the background seemed to turn into white noise. Lorenzo was already looking away, reaching for a bread roll, ignoring her completely. Sophie didn't move. "Mle bouche," she repeated softly. Lorenzo's hand froze halfway to the breadbasket. It wasn't the words that stopped him, it was the accent. She didn't say it like an American tourist trying to pronounce bruschetta. She said it with the guttural, clipped rhythm of the old country. He turned his head slowly, his brow furrowed. "I'm sorry," he said in English, assuming he'd misheard. Sophie didn't blink. She stepped closer to the table, violating the invisible barrier of personal space that Mafia bosses maintained around themselves. She spoke clearly, her voice cutting through the dining room noise, but she didn't speak English. Instead, she switched effortlessly to the same obscure Sicilian dialect he'd just used. "De Moretti," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You speak of mules, Don Moretti, but a real man doesn't insult those who serve him bread. Only dogs bark at those they can't bite." The clinking of cutlery at nearby tables stopped. Silvio dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the porcelain. Matteo, the bodyguard, partially rose from his chair, his hand dipping into his jacket for a weapon. Lorenzo raised his hand to stop him, but his eyes never left Sophie's face. The arrogance was gone, wiped clean by shock. His face pallid, then flushed with a dangerous heat. "Sisi also," Lorenzo whispered, reverting to the dialect. "Who are you?" Sophie tilted her head, a cold smile touching her lips. "Inu," she replied. "I am the one who brings your wine." She held his gaze for 3 seconds, each one lasting a heartbeat, an eternity in their world. A challenge. Then, as if a switch had flipped, she was the subservient waitress again. "I'll get the wine bottle now," she said in a monotone English. "Decanted. 1 hour," she said, turning on her heel and walking away. She could feel his eyes burning into her back. She pushed through the kitchen doors, and the moment they closed, she collapsed against the stainless steel counter, gasping for breath. "Sophie!" Marco yelled from the pass. "Where's the antipasto for table 4? "I'll get it," she snapped back, her hands trembling as she grabbed the platter of prosciutto and melon. She had made a mistake, a grave and potentially fatal one. You didn't humiliate a capo in front of his men, and you certainly didn't reveal that you spoke the secret language of the inner circle. In the dining room, the atmosphere at table 4 had shifted from relaxed to lethal. Lorenzo stared at the kitchen doors, gripping the tablecloth so hard his knuckles were white. "I understand," Silvio whispered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "Aberish. It's not schoolbook Italian, it's from the village, it's family." "I know what it is," Lorenzo growled. "Who is she?" Matteo asked, his eyes scanning the room. "A federal agent? A spy?" "No," Lorenzo said, his mind racing. "The feds learn Italian at the RCMP Academy in Regina. They sound like textbooks. She sounded like my grandmother." He looked down at his hands. He'd insulted her, called her trash, yet she'd rebuked him with more dignity than his own captains possessed. "Find out," Lorenzo ordered in a low voice. "Boss, can we just grab her after her shift?" Matteo suggested. "No," Lorenzo snapped. "We're in public, and I want to know who sent her. You don't find a girl like that serving pasta in King West by accident. Someone put her here. Maybe the Russians, or maybe the Triad, or maybe," Silvio said softly, "she's just a ghost." Lorenzo rose. "I'm not hungry." "Boss, I told you I'm not hungry. Leave dollars on the table, we're leaving." "I'll deal with the girl," Lorenzo said, buttoning his jacket. Sophie peeked through the small circular window in the kitchen door, just in time to see Lorenzo Moretti walking towards the exit. But before he reached the door, he stopped, turned, and looked directly at the kitchen window. He couldn't see her through the glass, but he knew she was there. He raised 2 fingers to his eyes and pointed at the door. "I'm watching you," he seemed to say. Sophie recoiled, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had wanted to wound his ego. Instead, she'd invited the wolf into her home. Her shift ended at 2 a.m., and Sophie spent the rest of the night jumpy at shadows. Every time a customer raised their voice, she thought it was a hit squad. She quickly changed out of her uniform, pulling on a baggy gray hoodie and jeans. She exited through the back alley, where the smell of wet cardboard and garbage greeted her. This was the unglamorous reality of Toronto. She walked quickly, head down, keys between her fingers, a habit acquired from living on the run. 2 blocks down Adelaide Street West, she saw a black Cadillac Escalade idling at the curb. The engine purred, and the windows were so dark, they looked like oil slicks. Sophie stopped. She turned to go the other way, but a sleek Maserati pulled out from a side street, blocking her retreat. She was cornered. The back door of the Escalade opened. It wasn't Matteo, or one of his capos, who emerged. It was Lorenzo. He was alone. He leaned against the doorframe and lit a cigarette. The flame illuminated the sharp angles of his face. He looked different under the streetlights. Less like a king and more like a street fighter in an expensive suit. "You walk fast," he said. Sophie didn't reply. She calculated the distance to the subway entrance. 50 meters. Too far. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, taking a drag. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have made it past the dumpster." "What do you want?" Sophie asked, her voice steady. "Answers," Lorenzo said. He dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his polished shoe. "You embarrass me tonight, Sophie. That's the name on the tag, right? Sophie is a common name, and you're speaking the dialect of the Corleone Mountains. Is that common?" He took a step towards her. "I looked you up while I was waiting. Sophie Miller. Social insurance number, issued in Manitoba. High school in Winnipeg. No passport, no family." He stopped a meter from her. He smelled of tobacco and danger. "Paper," he whispered. "You're made of paper, Sophie. Your entire life is a lie, typed by someone very good at forging documents. Who are you, really?" "I'm just a waitress who wants to go home," she said. "Liar." Lorenzo reached out. For a moment, Sophie thought he was about to hit her. Her body reacted on instinct. The muscle memory of training she hadn't used in years kicked in. When his hand moved towards her shoulder, she didn't flinch. Instead, she slapped his wrist away with her left hand, stepped inside his guard, and drove her right elbow towards his ribs. It was a swift, practiced move. Lorenzo, to his credit, was fast. He blocked the blow, but the force still knocked the wind out of him. He staggered back, staring at her, wide-eyed. Sophie was in a fighting stance, her center of gravity low, her hands raised. "Girls from Manitoba don't fight like Krav Maga instructors," Lorenzo gasped, a sly smile slowly returning to his face. He didn't look angry, he looked delighted. "Stay away from me, Moretti," Sophie warned. "You hit a man who works as a waitress." Lorenzo laughed darkly. "Do you know the penalty for that?" "I know the rules," she said. "You know the rules," he repeated. He straightened his jacket. "You speak the language, you fight like a soldier, and you hide like a spy." He moved closer again, slower this time, his hands raised in surrender. "I have a problem, Sophie. I have enemies all around me. I have traitors in my organization. Tonight, I found the only person in Toronto who isn't afraid of me." He reached into his pocket. Sophie tensed, ready to strike again. He pulled out a card. It was black, with a single golden phone number embossed on it. "I don't need a waitress," Lorenzo said softly. "I need someone who can see the knives coming before I do. Someone who understands the old ways." He slipped the card into her jacket pocket. "Call me or don't, but if the Russians find out who you really are before I do, you'll wish you were with me." He got back into the Escalade. The door slammed. Tires squealed as the car sped into the night, leaving Sophie alone under the flickering streetlight. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the card. Her hands were trembling again. The Russians. He'd mentioned the Russians. Sophie closed her eyes. If the Russians were in the city, it wasn't just her cover that had been blown. It was destroyed. The Russians were the ones who killed her father. She looked at the black card. Lorenzo Moretti was a monster, but he might be the only protection she had against the demons of her past. Sophie didn't go straight home. She took the subway, rode past her stop, got off at the next, took a bus back, and walked the last kilometer through the winding streets of Scarborough. At 3:30 a.m., she finally stood in front of her building. A crumbling brick edifice, no elevator, smelling of boiled cabbage and damp plaster. She paused at the front door. Something was wrong. It was a small thing, a detail most people wouldn't notice. Before leaving for work, she'd placed a small piece of clear tape on the bottom corner of the doorframe. It was an old trick her father had taught her when she was 12. Trust God, Sophia, but check everyone else. When she saw the tape was broken, she held her breath. Someone was inside. She backed away slowly, moving into the shadows of the alley. Her mind raced. Was it Lorenzo? Had he broken his promise and sent his thugs to drag her in? No. Lorenzo was arrogant but not careless. If he wanted her, he would have taken her then and there. This felt different. It felt clumsy. It felt like the Russians. She had two choices. She could run and leave everything behind, or go in and fight, leaving behind her saved money, her fake passports, and the only photo she had of her mother. Sophie touched the pocket of her hoodie. She had a steak knife from the restaurant and a small can of pepper spray. Not exactly an arsenal against Mafia killers. Then she remembered the black card. She pulled it from her pocket. The golden numbers gleamed in the dim light. Call me. She dialed the number. It rang once. Speak. It was Lorenzo's voice that answered. He sounded wide awake. There's someone in my apartment, Sophie whispered, pressing her back against the brick wall. There was a pause. The line crackled with static. Where are you? Outside in Scarborough, on 4th Street. Are you safe? For the next 30 seconds, at least. After that, I don't know. Stay hidden, Lorenzo ordered. Don't go in, don't engage. I have a car 2 blocks away watching you. Sophie froze. He had me followed. I told you, he said. I'm a logistics consultant. I protect my investments. Meet me at the corner of Young Street, gray sedan. The key word is Omia. Go. The line went dead. Sophie didn't have time to be angry about the surveillance. The front door of her building opened. 2 men emerged. They were large, wearing leather jackets that bulked out at the waist. They weren't Italian, they were Eastern European. The Russians used Albanian enforcers. One of them checked his phone. She's not inside. The place is empty. Find her, the other growled. Bring me her head, Don ordered. Sophie's blood ran cold. Bring me her head. This wasn't a recruitment drive. It was an execution. She hid deeper in the alley, navigating the labyrinth of dumpsters with silent steps. She reached the corner of Young Street just as the gray sedan pulled up. The window rolled down a few inches. Code? The driver asked. He looked like a former Marine. Omia, Sophie replied, diving into the back seat as soon as the door opened. Go, she yelled. Tires squealed as the car sped off, just as the 2 Albanians rounded the corner, guns drawn. They fired 2 shots, shattering the taillight, but the sedan had already swerved into traffic and disappeared into the city night. Sophie leaned back against the leather seat, her heart pounding against her ribs. She was alive, but Sophie Miller, the waitress, was dead. Her apartment had been compromised. Her identity was compromised. The car didn't stop until it reached a private underground parking garage in downtown Manhattan. An elevator whisked her up to the 35th floor, the penthouse suite of the St. Regis Hotel. The doors opened directly into a living room worth more than her entire life's earnings. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering urban sprawl of Toronto. Lorenzo stood by the fireplace, sipping an amber liquid from a tumbler. He'd changed out of his suit and into a black silk shirt and trousers. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. I have a pest problem, he said, turning to her. Albanian Russians, Sophie corrected, walking into the room. She felt dirty and insignificant in this palace of glass and gold. They hired the Albanians, the Russians, Lorenzo mused, swirling his drink. They're encroaching on my territory in the Portlands district. Aggressive and stupid. He looked at her. Why do the Russians want Sophie dead? Sophie. She walked to the window and looked out at the city that wanted to swallow her whole. Because my name isn't Sophie Miller. I know, Lorenzo said softly. I made some calls while you were on your way. He placed a folder on the glass table. You are Sofia Rossi, he said, daughter of Giacomo Rossi, the Don of Oliveto, who controlled the olive oil trade for 30 years until he was murdered in 2005. Sophia flinched. Hearing her real name spoken aloud was like a physical blow. They killed him, she whispered. The Russians. They wanted his shipping routes. They killed my mother and my brothers. I was away at boarding school in Switzerland. I was the only one left, and I've been running ever since. Cleaning tables, scrubbing floors, hiding from ghosts, Lorenzo concluded. I'm not hiding anymore, Sophie said, turning to him. Her eyes were dry. They found me. I have nowhere left to go. Lorenzo stepped closer to her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. You do, he said. The Rossi family were allies of the Morettis back in the old days. Your father and my grandfather shared meals together. He extended his hand. Work for me, Sofia, not as a waitress. Be my eyes, be my ears. You speak the dialect, you know the customs, you have the blood. My organization is full of snakes. I need a mongoose. What's in it for me? Sophie asked, looking at his hand. You get protection, Lorenzo promised. You get money, and when the time is right, you get the Russians. Sophie looked at his hand, then at his face. The Wolf of Toronto was offering her a pact with the devil, but for now, he was the only one with a sword big enough to defend her. She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, dangerous. Agreed, she said. The transformation took 3 days. Lorenzo didn't just offer her a job. He gave her a new skin. The cheap polyester uniforms and baggy hoodies were replaced by tailored blazers, silk blouses, and stiletto heels that felt like weapons. He moved her into a secure apartment in his building, 3 floors below his own. But the real change was internal. Sophie, now known as Sofia in the inner circle, had to relearn how to be a predator. Her first test came on a Tuesday night, a meeting with the Calibracci family at a private warehouse in the Portland's Industrial Park. Stay close, Lorenzo said, adjusting his earpiece in the back of the SUV. Don't speak unless I ask you to. Just listen. Listen to what they say, and more importantly, what they don't say. Who are we meeting? Vincent the Butcher Vargo, Lorenzo said, checking his pistol. He claims he wants peace, says he didn't know the Russians were moving in. Do you believe him? I believe everyone is a liar until they die, Lorenzo replied. They entered the warehouse. It was cold and smelled of rust and sea salt. Vargo was waiting at a metal table, surrounded by 4 guards. He was an obese man, grease stains on his shirt, his smile not reaching his eyes. Lorenzo sat opposite him. Silvio stood to his right. Sofia stood to his left, holding a folder that supposedly contained contracts, but actually held a loaded Glock 19 and a tracking device. The meeting started cordially. They spoke in standard Italian. Vargo apologized for the recent friction. He offered Lorenzo a percentage of his construction unions as a peace offering. I have no love for the Russians, Vargo said, spreading his hands. They're animals, no respect for tradition. You and I, Lorenzo, are men of honor. Lorenzo nodded, seemingly appeased. The construction deal is generous, Vincent. I accept. The tension in the room dissipated. Silvio relaxed his shoulders, but Sofia felt a prickle at the back of her neck. She watched Vargo's consigliere, a thin man named Paolo, who stayed in the shadows. As Vargo spoke Italian, Paolo whispered into a phone. He wasn't speaking Italian, he was speaking Arberesh. Sofia listened closely, filtering out the echoes of the warehouse. Isis, Nariti, Paolo whispered. The fish are in the net. Sofia's eyes widened. It was a trap. She didn't wait for permission. She stepped forward and placed her hand on Lorenzo's shoulder. It was a grave breach of protocol. Boss, she said in English, her voice sharp. We need to leave now. Vargo's smile vanished. Excuse me, who is this woman? Shut up. Lorenzo yelled at Vargo, then looked at Sofia. Why? Paolo, she said, pointing at the man in the shadows. He just gave the signal. The fish are in the net. We're not alone here. Vargo's face turned purple. She's lying. She's crazy. Lorenzo looked at Sofia. He could see the certainty in her eyes. He didn't hesitate. He kicked the table and used the heavy metal surface as a shield, just as the skylights above them shattered. Men rappelled down from the rafters on ropes. Their machine guns were firing. Ambush! Silvio yelled, returning fire. Go! Lorenzo grabbed Sofia's arm and dragged her behind a stack of shipping crates. Bullets chewed into the concrete where they'd been a second before. How did you know? Lorenzo yelled over the gunfire. He spoke the dialect. Sofia yelled back, pulling her Glock from her folder. They sold you to the Russians. They were pinned down. Vargo's men were closing in from the front, while the repelling team flanked them from above. Silvio was hit. Matteo yelled from across the room. The older consigliere was clutching his leg, blood seeping onto the floor. Lorenzo looked at his mentor, then at the exit 50 meters away, which was obscured by a hail of bullets. He looked trapped. For the first time, the wolf looked cornered. Sofia saw it too. She saw the hesitation. Cover me, she said. What? No. Lorenzo grabbed her. You're an analyst, not a soldier. I'm a Rossi, she snarled, shrugging off his grip. And nobody kills my boss on my first week. She didn't wait. She bolted from cover, running laterally across the open space. She wasn't just running, she was drawing fire. The shooters in the rafters shifted their aim to the woman in heels who ran like an Olympian. Sophia slid across the floor and ducked behind a forklift. She took a breath, stood, and fired 3 times. Her aim was true. 2 of the men in the rafters fell, their bodies hitting the concrete with a sickening thud. The distraction had worked. Lorenzo and Matteo dragged Silvio towards the exit, firing warning shots. Sophia joined them at the heavy iron door. Lorenzo kicked it open, and they stumbled out into the rainy night, where their convoy was waiting. They piled into the SUV and sped away from the ambush, tires squealing. Inside the car, there was silence for a full minute, broken only by Silvio's groans of pain. Lorenzo looked at Sophia. Her hair was disheveled, her blazer torn, and there was a smudge of grease on her cheek. She calmly and steadily reloaded her magazine. He had never seen anything so beautiful in his entire life. "You saved us," Lorenzo said, his voice filled with awe. "I did my job," Sophia replied, clicking the magazine into place. "You killed 2 men," Lorenzo observed. "It was self-defense." Lorenzo reached out and wiped the grease from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was gentle, a stark contrast to the violence they'd just escaped. "You're not just a Rossi," he whispered. "You're dangerous. Is that a problem?" she challenged, looking into his dark eyes. Lorenzo leaned in, his face mere inches from hers. The adrenaline still coursed through both their veins, creating an electric magnetic field. "No," he murmured. "It's exactly what I've been waiting for." For a moment, it seemed like he would kiss her. The air between them crackled with unexpressed desire, a potent mix of fear and attraction. Then, his phone rang. Lorenzo pulled away, breaking the spell. He answered, his face hardening. "What?" he yelled. After listening for a moment, he slowly lowered the phone, looked at Sophia, but the warmth had vanished from his eyes. In its place was a look of deep betrayal. "Driver," Lorenzo said coldly, "pull over the car." "What's wrong?" Sophia asked, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "It was my contact at the RCMP," Lorenzo said, his voice devoid of emotion. "He just ran the ballistics on the weapon found at Vargo's warehouse, the one his men used. It matches the weapon used to kill my brother 3 years ago." Lorenzo turned to Sophia, his eyes cold as ice. "The weapon belongs to the Rossi family." "Sophia, your father's family." Sophia froze. "That's impossible. My father has been dead for 20 years. Our weapons were destroyed." "Were they?" Lorenzo asked. "Or have you been lying to me all this time? Are you here to help me, Sophia? Or are you here to finish what your father started?" The car pulled over to the side of the rain-soaked highway. "Get out," Lorenzo said. "Lorenzo, listen to me." "I said get out," he yelled, his hand reaching for his weapon. "Remember, you saved my life 5 minutes ago." Sophia looked at him, tears of frustration burning in her eyes. He was wrong. Someone was framing her family and her, but the wolf was wounded and wouldn't listen to reason. She opened the door and stepped out into the torrential rain. The SUV sped off, leaving her abandoned on the side of the highway, alone once again. But this time she wasn't just a waitress running from her past. She was a soldier in a war she hadn't started, and she was determined to see it to the end. Sophia walked 5 kilometers in the rain until she found a roadside diner. She sat in a back booth, shivering as her wet clothes clung to her skin. She ordered a black coffee and stared into the dark liquid. Lorenzo thought she was a traitor. The Russians wanted her dead. Vargo recognized her. She was in checkmate, but Sophia Rossi had one advantage. Nobody knew she existed. Well, not exactly. To Lorenzo, she was an unpredictable factor. To the Russians, she was a loose end. But to herself, she was the daughter of the Olive Prince. She needed to find out who had planted the weapon, who was orchestrating the war between the Morettis and the ghost of the Rossis. She reached into her bra and pulled out a small, waterproof flash drive. She had stolen it from Vargo's office amid the chaos of the shootout. While everyone was shooting, she was stealing data. She pulled a cracked smartphone from her pocket, a burner phone she kept for emergencies, and plugged in the device. Scrolling through encrypted files, spreadsheets, payments, shipping manifests, she finally found what she was looking for: a transfer order for Project Lazarus. Delivery of supplies. Recipient: Matteo Giordano. Sophia stopped breathing. Matteo was Lorenzo's right-hand man, the brute with the scar. He was on Vargo's payroll. He had planted the weapon. He had set the ambush. Lorenzo was not being betrayed by the ghosts of the Rossis. He was being betrayed by the man who stood by his side. Sofia checked the file's date and time. A meeting had been scheduled for midnight tonight at Levetta, the restaurant where it all began. Matteo would deliver Lorenzo to the Russians. Tonight, the warehouse ambush had been a ploy to separate Lorenzo from his loyal men, to make him paranoid and isolate him. She had just been kicked out of the car. Lorenzo was alone with Matteo. Sofia looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11:15 p.m. She had 45 minutes to get back to downtown Toronto. She had no car, no reinforcements, and only 6 bullets left in her magazine. She ran to the parking lot. A trucker was getting into the cab of his rig. "Hey," she yelled, waving the $100 bill she'd hidden in her shoe. "I need a fast ride to the city." The trucker looked at the wet, desperate woman, her eyes fierce. "Get in, lady." The ride took 30 minutes. Sofia spent every second cleaning her weapon and praying to saints she hadn't believed in for years. The truck dropped her 2 blocks from Levetta. The streets were silent. The restaurant should have been closed, but there was a faint light on inside. Sofia crept to the back alley, the same one where Lorenzo had first confronted her. She peeked through the dirty window. The main dining room had been set for a private dinner, but there was no food. Lorenzo was tied to a chair in the center of the room. His face was bloody. He'd been beaten. Standing beside him was Matteo, holding a baseball bat. Sitting at table 4, Lorenzo's table, was a man Sofia recognized from her nightmares. Victor Russo, the man who shot her father. "You're losing your touch, Lorenzo," Russo said, cutting into a piece of steak. He laughed. "You let a girl distract you. Let your guard down. She had nothing to do with this." Lorenzo spat, blood trickling from his lip. "She's gone." "Is she?" Matteo smirked. "Or maybe she was working for me all along. Maybe she's the one who led you to the warehouse." "Don't you dare say her name," Lorenzo snarled. Even now, tied and beaten, he was defending her. Sofia felt a pang in her chest. He hadn't completely abandoned her. He was confused and hurt, but still protecting her. "It doesn't matter," Russo said, wiping his mouth. "Sign the waterfront transfer papers, Lorenzo. And I'll be quick. Refuse and I'll let Matteo practice his swing." Lorenzo looked up, his eyes defiant. "Go to hell." Matteo raised the bat. Sofia knew she couldn't take them all. There were 4 guards at the door, plus Matteo and Russo. 6 men, 6 bullets. She needed a distraction. She needed a miracle. She looked around the kitchen. The gas piping and stoves were industrial grade. If she cut the piping and created a spark, it would be suicide. But it was the only way to save him. Sofia kicked open the back door. This time she didn't sneak in. She burst in loudly. "Hey!" she yelled. Every head in the room turned. Matteo lowered the bat. Russo narrowed his eyes. "Who the hell is that?" "I'm the waitress," Sofia said, walking into the dining room. She held the gun at her side, looking harmless. "Sofia, run!" Lorenzo yelled, straining against the ropes. "I tried running," she said, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "I didn't like it." "Kill her," Russo ordered casually. 2 guards raised their weapons. "Wait!" Sofia yelled. "I have the flash drive with the encryption key to Lorenzo's offshore accounts. You want the money, don't you? It's all here." She brandished the flash drive in the air. Russo raised his hand. "Don't shoot." He looked at the flash drive greedily. "Bring it here." Sofia walked slowly. She passed through the kitchen. As she did, she subtly kicked the gas stove valve she'd loosened earlier. The silent, immortal hiss of gas began to fill the kitchen behind her. She walked to table 4. She was 5 feet from Lorenzo. "I'm sorry, boss," she whispered to him. "Sofia, what are you doing?" Lorenzo pleaded. She looked at Matteo. "You traitorous pig." She looked at Russo. "And you, murderer, give me the hard drive," Russo demanded, standing up. "Catch," Sofia said. She tossed the hard drive into the air, and everyone watched as the small silver object arced towards the ceiling. Sofia dropped to her knees. She didn't shoot Russo. She didn't shoot Matteo either. Instead, she fired a single shot into the kitchen, aiming blindly at the metal lining where sparks would fly. Boom! The kitchen exploded. A fireball erupted from the back, tearing the doors from their hinges and sending a wave of heat and debris into the dining room. The shockwave knocked everyone off their feet. Levetta's windows shattered outwards onto the street. The sprinkler system kicked in, drenching the flaming chaos in water. But, having anticipated the blast, Sofia was already moving. She clambered over the broken glass to get to Lorenzo. "Sofia!" He coughed, his ears ringing. She pulled a knife from her boot and slashed the ropes binding him. "Can you move?" "Yes," he groaned, struggling to his feet. "Then fight." Matteo stumbled up, his face burning with rage. He roared like an animal and lunged at them. Lorenzo met him halfway. He didn't have a gun, but he had rage. He intercepted Matteo's charge, driving his shoulder into the traitor's abdomen. They crashed into a table, shattering glass and spilling water. Meanwhile, Russo was crawling towards his gun. Sofia stepped on his hand. "Crunch!" Russo screamed. He looked at her, terror in his eyes. You're just like him." "Great," Sofia said. She raised her gun. "No," Lorenzo yelled, leaving Matteo unconscious behind him. "Sofia! No! We need him alive! We need the codes!" Sofia hesitated. Her finger was on the trigger. The man who had killed her father was right there. Justice was within reach. Sirens wailed in the distance. The police were coming. "Sofia!" Lorenzo grabbed her arm. "We have to go," he said. "If you kill him, the war will never end. We'll take him. We'll make him confess. We'll win the right way." She looked at Lorenzo. His face was bruised, and his suit was ruined. But he looked at her with desperate intensity. He wasn't ordering her as a boss. He was asking her as a partner. She lowered the weapon. "Grab him," she said. Lorenzo pulled a groaning Russo up by his collar. Sofia covered the exit. They stumbled outside into the cold night air, leaving behind the flaming ruins of Levetta. They reached the alley just as the first police car skidded to a halt outside. They collapsed against the brick wall of the adjacent building, hidden in the shadows. Both were gasping, drenched, bleeding, and alive. Lorenzo looked at her. He laughed, an uneven, breathless sound. "You blew up my restaurant," he said. "It was dry anyway," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. Lorenzo reached out and cupped her face. This time there was no phone call to interrupt them. He kissed her. Her kiss tasted of smoke, blood, and rain, but it was the most real thing either of them had ever experienced. "We're not done yet," Lorenzo whispered against her lips. "The other families will come after us." "Let them come," Sofia said, clutching his lapel. "I speak their language now." The hiding place was a deactivated freezer unit in northern Ontario, a cold steel tomb that smelled of rust. Victor Russo sat with his hands tied behind his back in the center of the room. He was bleeding from his broken nose but still smiled disdainfully. Lorenzo paced before him while Sofia leaned against a conveyor belt, the Glock resting comfortably in her hand. "It's over, Victor," Lorenzo said, his voice flat. Matteo ran. "My restaurant is gone. But you're here. You can't kill me," Russo spat. "I'm a family boss. If you kill me without a commission vote, the other 3 families will come after you. You'll start a war you can't win." Lorenzo stopped. He knew Russo was right. The old laws protected the Dons. "I don't need to kill you," Lorenzo said calmly. "I just need the truth. Admit you framed the Rossi family." Russo laughed, a wet gurgling sound. "I'd rather die." Sofia pushed off the wall, walking slowly towards him. She didn't look angry. She looked ancient. She stopped inches from his face. "Labulev," she whispered. "Do you remember the olive trees?" Russo blinked. The dialect unnerved him. "I remember," Sofia continued. "I was 10 years old. You came to my father's house in Palermo. You gave me a gold coin. Then you shot my father in the back in the olive grove." Russo was paralyzed, his face pale. The waitress wasn't just a look-alike. She was a ghost. "Sofia," he whispered. "It was business. It's always business." She agreed. She picked up a burner phone. "I'm not going to kill you, Victor. That would be too easy." She dialed a number and put the phone on speaker. A heavily accented voice answered. It was Don Iamino, the head of the Sicilian Commission and the highest authority in their world. "Don Iamino," Sofia said, her eyes fixed on Russo. "This is Sofia Rossi, daughter of Giacomo." There was silence on the line, then a deep, low voice. "We thought you were dead, child." "I was," Sofia said, "until Victor Russo tried to finish the job tonight. I have him here. He killed a man without authorization 20 years ago, and tonight he used explosives in a civilian establishment." Russo struggled against his restraints. "Hang up. Hang up the phone." In their world, being condemned by Sicily was worse than death. It was being erased. "Pass the phone to Victor," Don Iamino commanded. Sofia placed the phone to Russo's ear. "Victor," the old voice crackled, "you have brought shame upon your families. You are alone. Do what is honorable." The line went dead. Russo sagged in defeat. He wasn't afraid to die. He was afraid of being stripped of his name. "What do you want?" Russo whispered. Retirement, Sofia said coldly. Florida. Never set foot in Toronto again. If you do, the order from Sicily will remain in effect. Russo nodded slowly. He had been defeated not by fists, but by lineage. 3 days later, the meeting took place at Café Roma in Little Italy. The heads of the 3 remaining families, the Falcone, the Santoro, and the Valenti, sat at the marble table, skeptical and tense. Lorenzo walked in, bruised, but wearing a new suit. He stood at the head of the table. Russo is gone, Lorenzo announced. I've absorbed his operations. That's aggressive, said the head of the Santoro family, Frank, tiredly. Who helped you orchestrate such a coup? We hear Silvio is in the hospital. Lorenzo smiled. Gentlemen, may I introduce my partner? Sofia walked in. She wore a tailored white suit that seemed to glow in the dim light. The only jewelry she wore was a single heavy gold ring, her father's ring. This is Sofia Rossi, Lorenzo said. The name hit the table like a hammer. Sofia walked to the empty chair beside Lorenzo. Gentlemen, she addressed them, her voice commanding. My father respected this table. I intend to do the same. But know this, the Moretti and Rossi families are now one. She looked at each of them, unwavering. Russo underestimated us, because he saw a waitress, not an equal. Don't make the same mistake. Frank looked at Lorenzo, then at Sofia, saw the way they stood together as a united front, a dynasty. Frank nodded slowly and raised his familiar espresso cup. To the future, he said. 6 months later, the new restaurant was called L'Eredità. The legacy was grander than the old. On opening night, the room was filled with politicians and power brokers. Sofia stood on the balcony, watching the scene below. She saw a young waitress drop a fork and fluster. Sofia descended the stairs, weaving through the crowd. I'm so sorry, Signora Rossi, the girl stammered. Please don't fire me. Sofia picked up the fork and smiled. It was a genuine, warm smile. Breathe, she said. I used to work this station. Table 4 is a nightmare, isn't it? The girl blinked. You worked here? Yes, and I dropped a lot more than a fork. Sofia squeezed her shoulder. Walk like you own the place, and eventually you will. She turned to leave and found Lorenzo waiting at the bar with 2 glasses of amber liquid. You're too soft, he teased, handing her a glass. I'm efficient, she corrected. Fear makes people clumsy. Respect makes them loyal. Lorenzo looked at the empire they'd built together, then looked at her. Do you miss it? Being invisible, the simple life? Sofia looked at the front door. She thought of the fear, the hiding, and the loneliness of being Sophie Miller. Then, she looked at Lorenzo, the wolf who had made her queen. No, she said. Leaning in, she whispered in his ear in the Sicilian dialect one last time. Suomenta Enzo, I'm home. Finally, I'm home. Lorenzo smiled, the rare, genuine smile she'd only seen once before. He took her hand, and they turned to face the room together. They were the king and queen of Toronto, and God help anyone who forgot to bring them their bread. From waitress to the underworld queen of Toronto, Sofia Rossi proved you should never judge a book by its cover, or a woman by her apron. She didn't just survive the shark-infested waters, she became the shark. It makes you wonder how many people walk past us on the street every day, hiding secret powers, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and mafia justice, like the post, it helps the channel a lot. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss the next dramatic story. What would you have done if you were in Sofia's position? Would you have saved Lorenzo or left him to his fate?